person right here.
Hello and good evening, everybody. Welcome tonight. The clerk informs me that it's 7 p.m. and we will begin with the meeting. We will start with a moment of silent reflection, the singing of O Canada, and the traditional land acknowledgement. Please rise. We acknowledge that the land we gather on is part of the treaty lands and territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. We recognize the traditional territory of the Huron-Wendat and the Haudenosaunee people. We also acknowledge the First Nation, Métis, and the Inuit people who live on these lands today. We commit to working towards reconciliation. Please be seated. Hello, everyone. Welcome to tonight's meeting. I'm Councillor Samira Ali, and I'll be your budget chair for tonight's meeting. At this point, I will look to the clerk to see if she has any advice for us.
Thank you. In terms of announcements, I wanted to note that a revised agenda was posted on Friday, December 1st, which included the addition of Marshall Horner as a delegate for this evening's meeting with regard to staff report course 5723 related to the 2024 capital and operating budget. I wanted to advise that Doug Watson has withdrawn his registered delegation for this evening's meeting. I also wanted to note that the written submission from Hunter Culhane regarding staff report course 5723 2024 capital and operating budget was circulated to members of council in advance of this meeting.
Well, thank you, Madam Clerk, for that update. Are there any disclosures of pecuniary interest? Councillor Best.
Yes, Madam Chair, as I discussed with staff earlier, I have declared a conflict on the Milton Seniors Activity Center, part-time salaries. My wife is employed there as an instructor.
Thank you for letting us know. And just for our council members and the audience reference, that will be the clause 4B of the clauses that will be discussed on later. Thank you for that declaration, Councillor Best. At this point, I'm looking at our CFO to see if he has any comments to add.
Thank you, Chair. Just a couple minor things. Just to confirm for council that all of the remaining feedback from the Let's Talk Milton page that's been received has been circulated to council this morning, along with all of the remaining questions and responses from staff. Would also just like to note that similar to prior years, we will be updating council through this meeting with the update as to where the operating budget and tax impacts reside along the way. When doing so, council will recall, and I'll speak to this a little more in my presentation, there is an updated figure from the regional level. That process is not complete yet, but there is an updated figure that's been requested by the police board. So for the sake of tonight's discussion, we'll refer to the higher number, and I'll walk you through that in the presentation later on.
Thank you. Thank you to our CFO for that update. We will now move on to the delegation section of our agenda. And I would like to, at this point, welcome those members of the public that have registered as delegates for the 2024 budget. I'd also like to remind our delegates that they will each have 5 minutes to provide their comments, after which council may have some questions regarding their presentation. And as the clerk has just confirmed that one of our delegates has dropped off. So we have only one tonight, and that is Mr. Marshall Horner. Please come forth, Mr. Horner.
It works. Get myself organized here for a moment. My name is Marshall Horner. I reside at 524 Sunnyvale Crescent in Milton, Ontario. Madam Chair, members of council and staff. On November 20th of this year, I left a letter for the mayor and each member of council expressing my concern of council not continuing a program started at the 2023 budget meeting of finally ensuring all 4 urban fire stations in Milton being completely staffed 24/7 with full-time professional career firefighters. With my calculations, the difference between the 9.50%, an increase with no specific or transparent detail, and the 13.06% discussion level recommended by staff is on our home at 524 Sunnyvale Crescent, $60.12. Of that amount, $14.66 is my cost to provide 24/7 coverage from Station 3. It may not be sufficient to fully fund the staffing, but will it allow me to sleep with a clear conscience? Here is my payment. A number of years ago, a group of residents, seeing the need to growth in our community, was going through placed on the current hospital facility set about making that need known to the provincial government. A campaign of growth was introduced to ensure the required services for our new young neighbors would be here before they arrived. As stated in my written presentation, I do not believe that growth pays for growth. However, the intent of Bill 3 is to aggressively increase the number of homes made available in our community, a level which will create in the future a unique burden on the residents to support reasonable new infrastructure services. As such, the province, must accept the responsibility to provide the seed money to support that insistent demand for housing. They should provide the monies required to ensure safety and other services are in place as the new communities mature to a level to support these amenities. If council stands together to meet its current obligation to fund the staffing of Station 3, I believe it becomes incumbent upon people such as myself to ensure the higher levels of government are made aware of what we feel are their obligations in helping our communities grow in a safe and secure environment. A challenge if council tonight supports each other in providing equal services to all current residents, I will engage in, along with encouraging other members of our community, starting tomorrow, to impact what we feel for present and possible future provincial representatives' obligations to be met. Perhaps it is time we replace the postcards used for the hospital campaign with modern-day social media to contact all political parties, to remind them of their responsibility to turn growth pays for growth to growth enhances value in our community. A couple of years ago, I raised the question of the actual number of full-time 24/7, 365-day per year fire units available, and a senior member of council waited until I left the podium before asking a member of the fire department. A question was not in the same vein as my statement. He received a political but inaccurate answer. As I had left the podium, I was not able to address the false statement. Tonight, I would appreciate one of two courtesies. Questions in reference to my presentation be addressed before I leave the podium in order for me to properly clarify my position and/or statements. Or any statements made in reference to my presentation after I leave the podium, if I stand at my seat, I be given a point of order to address those statements. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Horner, for your delegation and for keeping it within the 5-minute time slot. Are there any members
That was difficult.
I certainly appreciate that. Councillor Best has a question for you.
Yes, thank you for your presentation and your continued interest in the budgets. You mentioned about the previous statement. Could you just highlight to council what that statement was and what you felt was incorrect about it?
At the time, we had one full-time fire truck on the streets of Milton. The question was asked, and it was a chief who is no longer here, about the number of vehicles that we had. And the answer was that we had a number. We had 8 or 9. However, they were all part-time respondents. And as I pointed out in my letter that I sent around, the time for them to respond is added dramatically. And as I said, right now, we're missing 8 firefighters. My calculations, and I haven't heard anybody dispute them, they may be wrong, is about $730 some odd thousand. It's 0.87% of your budget.
Thank you.
Councillor Kalki has a question for you.
Thanks, Madam Chair. If you wanted to stick around, there will be a resolution on the floor at a moment. later on in relation to fire services, if you want to hear that, so that way you're not.
Oh, I'll be
Finding
here
it
all,
after.
I'll be
Okay.
here all night.
Yep. Thank you.
Thank you.
I do have some questions with regard to the presentation that was done, I guess, last week. And the minutes that were presented for that. There were some ambiguous answers. The question itself was ambiguous, and some of the answers I feel were ambiguous. One of the people that I have a great deal of concern for, and because of my age, it may affect me, and that's the Schlegel retirement people. They may be one of the organizations that I'm looking at to perhaps retire to. And one of the things I intend to do is to ask them where they stand and what information they have available.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Horner. Your comments have been noted by our staff. And with regards to the comments about the budget and the questions you sent earlier, I'm pretty sure our staff will reach out to you and address those questions.
Okay.
Thank you for your time tonight.
That's fine. The questions that I have, I intend to present to Schlegel because I'm seriously considering, and I want to know what information they had available to them. I feel that there's a great danger in that fire station only having part-time or half staff. And as I said, I spent 4 hours driving up and down the streets.
Thank you, Mr.
During
Horner.
some time.
Thank you.
All
Thanks
right.
for letting us know.
Thank you.
Thank you. And we had just one delegation tonight, and we have no other delegations. So we will move on to the presentations part of tonight's agenda. And I would like to invite our CFO, Glenn Cohen, to the podium in order to provide a brief presentation regarding the 2024 budget. Welcome, Glenn.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, everyone. So I will be brief tonight, just to provide a summary, more introduction to getting into the deliberation. And I'll just touch on a few of the points that we did touch on in the workshop as well last week. Just starting from a process perspective, touching on both where we have been and where we currently are. The process really goes back to the early summer from a public engagement perspective. Even before that this year, because we did the citizen engagement survey earlier in actually late 2022. This is the first budget that we're utilizing those results, updated results from, noting that they've been fairly consistent between the different studies we've undertaken. More recently, we've had the budget workshop and of course the release of the proposed budget on November 15th. This is the first budget process that's utilizing the new legislation. So the step we're currently in is the 30-day period where council can make amendments to the proposed budget, followed by an opportunity for a veto process and a potential override process, subject to decisions made by council and the mayor. In terms of how we've come from the September report to the final budget that's presented in November, this is just a quick summary of some of the larger steps taken to go from what was identified as a pressure to ultimately what is the recommended budget that is tabled in front of council. Some of the line items are sustainable in terms of the steps that have been taken in terms of finding reductions in spending, new revenue sources, potentially deferring a couple of items before being introduced to the community. Other elements are things like the stabilization reserve and the changes made to the infrastructure funding, which there is a plan within the multi-year plan to either phase those out or reintroduce them in the case of the infrastructure annual funding amount. With those changes, the budget that is tabled is a $98 million levy ultimately, as you can see summarized here by department. Of note is from the gross cost, there is approximately half of the revenue being non-property tax based, with user fees being one of the larger sources within the various program areas. Also of note is the fact that in addition to the town's budget is approval of the DBIA budget here tonight. And just as a reminder that was approved by the board. So it's relaying the information that's already been board approved for the DBIA. Within the budget, there are a number of ways in which the budget is supporting and investing in the council strategic plan. I won't read the list in front of you, which is really itself just a short and abbreviated list of what you'll find in the budget document, but certainly it touches on areas that were identified as priority, including transit, investment in technology, in facilities, and in people. And we continue some of the processes for planning those next phases of growth with the work that's anticipated in 2024 as well. Getting to what it means from a final tax rate perspective. So this first slide is the one that will reflect what's in the budget document in front of you. So based on what was known at the time of the budget call report in September and based on the still existing guidance that was given at the regional level, the proposed budget would result in, from a local perspective, a 9.5% change in our budget. But when we look at all three levels of government and the blended rate, what was anticipated to be a 5.37% total, which is really what the bottom line from a property taxpayer would look like on the residential side. And you can see here as well, it would translate to around $39 per 100,000 of assessment. So the change I mentioned in the introductory comments is that as the region and the police continue to work through their own process, we do know that there is a potential for a higher number at their level. From a timing perspective, their budget will be passed after ours. I believe they have a committee meeting this week and a council meeting next week. So as you can see here, with the revised budget as it's currently being presented at that level, it would be a 5.06% change combined at the regional level. So with what is proposed in our budget, what the bottom line on the property tax bill would be in the order of 5.78%. So as we provide updates tonight, it'll be on the basis of this 5.06% at the regional level that we'll speak to. Once all processes are done and the region has finalized theirs, we will also be updating the figures, and the final approved budget document that will be available to the public will reflect the final amounts from each level. So beyond the current year budget pressure, included within our forecast is the next 2 years as well. As you can see here, the pressure continues. You know, what we were discussing back in September is in order of magnitude what the starting points for the next 2 years could look like based on what we currently know. It's a continuation of inflation, albeit not necessarily at as high of a level as what we see today, but continuing to work in the inflationary pressures that are on the non-residential construction and capital side. Will take us a few budget cycles to fully reflect those. It also includes the resumption of funding for the infrastructure deficit, as well as phase out of the stabilization reserve in these years, plus some of the new growth initiatives that are either anticipated within our budget or based on when we believe we'll assume various infrastructure and assets through subdivision agreements. In terms of a comparison from a property tax perspective, I'll just share this one graph tonight, noting there's some others available within the budget document. This is the total amount per the average house from the most recent BMA study. And you can see Milton's position here. And just as a reminder, when we talk about the per $100,000 numbers, to get to the average, it's a factor of 6. So, you know, based on the existing returned roll that we use, $600,000 is an approximate average from a residential perspective. So you can see here, it's about a $600 per house differential to, you know, the next municipality in our comparator group. And that $600, even though what the totals here are reflective of the town, the region, and the school boards, the difference in the 600 is entirely at the local level. Aside from the operating budget, also included in tonight's agenda is the capital program. So this is just presenting at a summary level what's included within the 2024 budget. The one note that maybe makes this slightly different from a normal year would really be with respect to funding. You would see that this year especially, there's slightly a little more weighting than what we would be normally used to seeing with respect to the non-growth investment. It's around 2/3 of the overall program, when in a normal year, we would see growth being around 2/3. So that's reflected in the combination of the different reserves that are proposed to fund the program. From an investment perspective, you can see no surprise, roads and facilities are generally our largest areas of investment, and that'll be no different in 2024. So with that, I'm happy to take any questions now or through the discussion, and I appreciate the time.
Thank you so much, Glenn, for your presentation. I have Councillor Best as the first speaker.
Yes, a couple of questions, Glenn. Thanks for your presentation, the work that your staff have done. Regarding the Bill 23, the reductions in development charges, how much of an impact is that having on your budget?
So I'll speak to this from two perspectives. The immediate pressure from a budget perspective with respect to development charge exemptions. We are including a small increase, $200,000 within the property tax increase next year for that. Really, we do need to accelerate the additional amounts we add in future years for that. It is expected that we're going to spend around $5 million a year over the next number of years on exemptions. Those really relate largely, and the reason we've seen the increase, it's because of secondary units and the fact that those do need to be funded from a non-growth source. So we've been slowly ramping up the amount in property taxes to fund those kind of exemptions. You know, from the time we started till now, we're probably slightly short of $2 million of what we've been accumulating. But to close the rest of the gap to that 5 million spend before we draw on the reserves too significantly, we are going to need to increase the annual investment probably in the order of around $500,000 a year. The more recent legislative changes in development charges affect a number of different other areas. We haven't been affected as significantly yet by those. The two most significant, or that have the most significant potential for us, would be the next time we open our development charge bylaw in 2026. If we have to introduce the phasing, there's a potential for the need to fund that, which would be significant because we'd be talking out of in the first year alone, 20% of all development charge revenue. And then it would be phasing down over 5 years from there. Other areas where they haven't enacted the regulations yet would be the cost of land as an example. So there are going to be more impacts down the road. There isn't anything included in the property tax increase we're proposing for next year related to those yet, but we will continue to monitor. And certainly by the time we're in our next development charge bylaw update, we may be talking about what's needed to address some of those future pressures.
Thank you for the information. And if you had any information back from any provincial staff regarding the province's commitment to making municipalities whole, and how would you treat if the money was received from the province in whatever form?
So nothing specific as to what that could look like. There has been announcement of funding such as I want to get the name right here, the Building Community Fund, the one where if you exceed your growth target, there would be funding available for municipalities. That's the closest I've seen for something directly related to that, but we're still at such an early stage of knowing what the dollars could actually look like and whether it would actually resolve some of those other pressures.
And if you were to receive this money either from the province or from builders, how would you treat that additional revenue?
We would have to look at the specific guidelines that are provided with it to see how prescriptive they may be. Certainly where we've had these pressures, I mentioned having to get up to that 5 million a year, that would be a great starting point, but we would have to look to council as to where the investment is best made.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Best. Are there any other questions to our CFO? I'm not seeing any, so thank you so much for your presentation. Okay, well, we will now get down to business, which is the business of the budget. And we are going to now put all of the recommendations from report CORS 05723 on the floor in order to allow deliberation. Once on the floor, we will deliberate each recommendation clause individually, but withhold the final vote to the very end such that they can be voted on in their entirety. We will approach it this way just in case any amendments arise from the operating budget that affect the capital budget or vice versa. We will also address the conflict of interest momentarily. And to that effect, I have a motion that has been moved by Councillor Malbouf and seconded by Councillor Kalki to put the 10 recommendations from report CORS 05723 on the floor for deliberation. So that is where we will start. And due to the declared conflict of Councillor Best, we will need to have a housekeeping amendment to the wording of recommendation number 4 in order for clarity for council, and the public. Recommendation 4 will now read as follows. 4A, that the 2024 operating budget for town and library resulting in a net tax levy of $98,502,101, assuming 2.29 net assessment growth as outlined on Appendix 4 of this report, save and accept the portion of the seniors program salaries and benefits be received for review and any amendments made by council. 4B, that the 2024 operating budget for seniors program salaries and benefits in the amount of $39,512 be received for review and any amendments made by council. Are there any concerns or questions on this matter from any members of council? Councillor Challoner?
Thanks, Madam Chair. I just had a question about procedure. So I know there's a number of amendments that have been put forward by various members of council for discussion. At what point are we discussing those?
I will defer to the clerk to answer that question.
Those will be forthcoming. Really, this is a housekeeping amendment that we need to make in order to reflect the declared conflict. So as Councillor Ali noted earlier on in the meeting, we'll have to vote separately on 4B just due to the conflict. So we'll proceed through and address those clauses just as soon as we get going with the rest of the recommendation here. So for this purpose, this is just for housekeeping at this moment.
Okay, because I think it's fairly obvious to everybody that 4A is a bit of a problem. If you're bringing forward amendments, you're putting the cart before the horse to even vote on it. 4B, I get it. There's a conflict of interest.
Yeah, at this point, it's not approving any motions, just ensuring that council's okay with splitting out 4 into 2 clauses, 4A and 4B, which will be considered later on in the meeting.
Okay.
Thank you. I'm really happy you asked that question because it is a little bit confusing. And as we go along clause by clause, we will achieve more clarity on this. So seeing as there are no other questions to this, we will proceed with the required amendments and now proceed through the individual recommendations and address any motions to amend that council may want to consider. So I'm going to clause 1 now, so you can follow along. Clause 1 states that the 2024 capital budget with a gross amount of $83,660,103 as outlined in Appendix 2, and the capital forecast with a gross amount of $1,369,298,807 as outlined in Appendix 3 of this report be received for review and any amendments made by council. And as we discussed before, this is clause 1. I have an amendment to this clause, which is a motion. And it is moved by Councillor Kalki and seconded by Councillor Best that a new capital project be added to the 2024 budget for a stop sign beacon pilot project with a funding of $72,512 provided from the studies and other non-growth capital reserve, and that the pilot provide for the installation at 1 all-way stop intersection per ward in 2024. I have read the motion. I will now go to the mover and the seconder for any comments. Mover, Councillor Kalki.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So this motion is in relation to some common road safety concerns and inquiries I received from residents, particularly for motorists that fail to stop at stop signs, which in turn usually results in collisions, near misses, and ultimately puts other road users at risk as well. I'll be the first person to say that the best way to change driver behavior for this particular offense is through police enforcement. However, the police can't be everywhere at once, and I felt that there was still an opportunity to do more on the town end. And as a result of that, began speaking with staff to look into additional alternatives to increase the chances of motor vehicle compliance with stop signs. I was able to obtain collision data for our all-way stop signs in all 4 of our wards in the community, dating back to collisions that have occurred within a 5-year period. The most collision-prone intersections are as follows. In Ward 1, the intersection of Commercial Street and Pine Street saw 6 collisions. In Ward 2, the intersection of 5 Side Road and Boston Church Road saw 17 collisions. And in Ward 3, the intersection of Clark Boulevard and Bennett Boulevard saw 7 collisions. And in Ward 4, the intersection of Farmstead Drive and McLaughlin Avenue saw 7 collisions. So within a 5-year period, these are the intersections in each part of each of our wards that have the most collisions. And having said that, the intent of this resolution is to have flashing red beacons mounted on top of all-way stop signs at our 4 most collision-prone intersections in all of our wards as a 1-year pilot program in an effort to reduce collisions and increase stop sign compliance. As per the Ontario Traffic Manual, flashing red beacons are intended to be used in areas that have poor stop sign compliance and a collision history. With the collision data that we do have that I mentioned a moment ago, this resolution, if passed, would be a data-driven approach towards furthering our efforts to improve road safety, and I'm hoping I can get council support for this. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Kalki. Councillor Best.
Yes, Madam Chair, I fully support Councillor Kalki's recommendation. As some of us might remember, there was a number of these red beacons in the rural area over the years, and bringing them into the urban area would also assist because unfortunately, there's the 3 E's of traffic: enforcement, engineering, and education. Unfortunately, the province is, from my opinion, has been lax in terms of education. We have to step it up in terms of enforcement and engineering. We've had a real traffic issue throughout the, and the ones as mentioned here by the councillor, highlight how dangerous it is when you have every 2 months and actually almost every 3 weeks happening in these intersections. We need to find better ways to enforce our traffic laws and let people know that there is stoplights. We've had numerous fatalities in this community due to people not obeying stop signs.
Thank you, Councillor Best. Certainly, visibility is important. I have a speakers list to this motion. Councillor Tesser-Dirksen is next.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a question of clarity to the mover and seconder through you, Madam Chair. Is it part of the motion that those specific intersections will be the ones that receive the pilot, or that'll be something we can discuss?
Councillor Kalki?
Yeah, through you, Madam Chair. No, that can still be discussed. The motion is simply to get funding secured from our capital program project to be able to fund the fact that we can do 4 intersections, 1 in each ward. And these are numbers that I got from collision data within the past 5 years, but it's still up to each councillor to have a say in which stop sign or intersection they would like to see these at.
Thank you, Madam Chair, through you. I appreciate that because the volume of accidents is startling. However, we have other intersections where the volume may not be as high, but the severity of the accidents can be much more serious, mostly in our rural areas. So I like the fact that that would be left up to the individual councillors and traffic staff.
Councillor Kalki?
Yeah, thanks, Madam Chair. And also further to that, these are collisions that get reported and are actually documented. There's also collisions that might not get reported. So there's that element as well.
Thank you, Councillor Kalki. Anything further, Councillor Tesser-Dirksen? Okay. Going on to the next speaker, Councillor Melbos.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, I'll be supporting this, and Ward 4 had 17. The intersection mentioned in by the councillor is in Ward 4, 17, basically double of any of the other locations. So I'll support this as a pilot project. It'll be, and I would be pushing that intersection be the one in our ward, John and our ward, that have that beacon stop sign, so that we can monitor, see basically what impact it does have, and does it help solve the problem or mitigate the problem. So I'll be supporting this.
Thank you, Councillor Melbov. I have Councillor Ijaz next.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Prioritizing the safety of our residents is of utmost importance. And in this pursuit, I support this motion. By investing in this targeted safety measure, we commit to fostering a secure environment for our community, addressing critical aspects of road safety and safeguarding the well-being of our residents. Due to this reason, I support this motion. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Ijaz. Next, I have Councillor Challoner.
Thanks, Madam Chair. In principle, I am supportive of what is being proposed, but I need to hear from staff in terms of the human resource implications for this. It wasn't something that was planned for this year. And I also want to know if they're comfortable with proceeding with it generally, because yeah, the cost is one thing, but who's going to do the work? So that's my question to engineering.
Okay, I think Commissioner Hogan will answer this question.
Thank you for the question, Councillor Challoner. We do have the people power to implement this, and we are definitely supportive of it.
Great, thank you.
Thank you, councillors. Any other comments or questions? I don't see any, so I will call the vote now on this motion. All those in favor, please raise your hand. And it is carried. At this point, I would like to ask my colleagues on council if there are any further motions to be considered in relation to clause 1 of the 2024 capital budget and forecast. I do not see any, so I'm going to move on to clause 2 now. Clause 2 states that in accordance with SS 5(1) of the Development Charges Act of 1997 and S5 of Ontario Regulation 82/98, it is council's clear intention that any eligible excess capacity provided by the 2024 capital program will be paid for by future development charges. That is clause 2. Are there any motions to be considered in relation to this clause? Seeing none, I will, Mayor Krantz.
No amendments to that, Madam Chair. And again, if through you to Glenn to drill exactly right down, really, what does this mean, bottom line? I guess a little bit of clarity just on clause 2. As I understand, I want to be correct in my understanding of it.
Thank you, Mayor Krantz. Glenn will answer that.
Both clause 2 and 3 are really housekeeping items based on the legislation. By having council's clear intention, it'll make sure that we have the opportunity to maximize our development charge utilization in the future and make sure that we get the revenue where we need it.
Anything further, Mr. Mayor? Okay, well, as I'm seeing no other motions to this clause, I'm going to move to clause 3. Clause 3 states that any donations, grants, or subsidies applied in the 2024 capital program to projects with development charges funding are to offset the non-growth related costs of those projects unless otherwise specified. Are there any motions to be considered in relation to this clause from any of my colleagues on council? I'm seeing none, so I'm now going to move on to clause 4, which is, as clerk advised before, has been divided into 2, A and B, because of the conflict of interest declared earlier in the meeting. So going to clause 4A. Clause 4A as amended states that the 2024 operating budget for town and library resulting in a net tax levy of $98,582,101, assuming 2.29% net assessment growth as outlined on Appendix 4 of this report, save and accept the portion of the seniors program salaries and benefits be received for review and any amendments made by council. And to that effect, on clause 4A, I have a number of motions. And the first motion before me is moved by Councillor Kalki and seconded by Councillor Best, that a senior transportation planning technologist, 1 full-time employee, be added to the 2024 operating budget with funding from the tax levy of $155,055. I will now go to the mover of the motion to speak to it.
Thanks, Madam Chair. I just want to start off by talking about the recent strategic planning that we did. And one of the first imperatives that we established through that planning process was that we would be investing in people. And this is what this motion really speaks to, and the fact that the intent is to secure funding to hire a senior transportation technologist. This role would provide the town with a lead person who will work on the transportation master plan study and facilitate the implementation of it. The position is really important because it would play a key role in creating further active transportation initiatives townwide and work towards making cycling and walking a safe and desirable alternative to driving. In addition, this position would review the high-profile development applications that we receive, including those high-density mixed-use developments where balancing both vehicle and pedestrian traffic is really critical and important. This position would also be the lead for all Halton Region road environmental assessments and will ensure that Milton has a strong voice at that table. One of the key parts, like I said, of our strategic plan was to invest in people. And in order for us to serve Milton residents appropriately, we must make investments like these right now rather than deferring them to ensure we have applicable resources in town staffing to help deliver positive results for our community. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Jess. Councillor Best as the seconder.
Yes, just echoing the comments as we've seen with a recent high density applications, we need to have the staff there to plan and anticipate traffic projections, because we cannot rely on consultants alone. And who knows, we might even reduce costs in the future, because as we saw in the discussions on Thompson Road and Ontario Street and the impact of additional traffic, we need to know the implications and also plan ahead in terms of our capital budgets to make sure that we have the appropriate traffic and also transit coordination as well.
Thank you, Councillor Best. I have a speakers list now. Councillor Ijaz is first.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The incorporation of a senior transportation planning technologist into the 2024 operations budget would exceed the 9.5% tax increase outlined in the mayor's proposed 2024 budget, which aligns with council's request budget direction. Due to this reason, I cannot support this motion. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Ijaz. Councillor Challoner is the next speaker.
Thanks, Madam Chair. I can't support this motion either. There's a couple things that I think about when I hear this. The second thing is, well, the first thing is we are investing in terms of people. There's 20 new hires coming on this year if this budget is approved. The fact is that when you look at those things that drive revenue in this corporation, we aren't where we need to be, whether it's housing starts or other revenue. Our population isn't where it was projected to be. And so the need isn't immediate. And I think staff recognize that in not bringing it forward into the budget this year. And I think that needs to be respected. The other thing is that we're way over in terms of a budget that, quite frankly, is satisfactory to the majority of Miltonians. We're in a recession. Interest rates are high. Mortgage defaults are increasing. People not paying their taxes is increasing. I think 2024 is going to be like 2023. And for that reason, I think that we need to really put the foot on the brake and not the gas pedal in 2024. If we have to wait another 12 months for this position to be filled, in my mind, that's just common sense. The need is not there this year. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Challoner. First time speaker, Mayor Krantz.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. And again, I cannot and will not support the request there as well. But just a little bit of clarity, as I recall, the report that's going forward to council suggests 20 new staff people. On the assumption that this was to pass, and on the assumption that the next one was to pass, we're talking about 22 additional full-time individuals. Correct me if I'm wrong.
And maybe our CFO can respond to that.
That's correct.
Okay, then recently we were circulated with a document that suggests there's many people in the employ of the town that makes over $100,000. I believe that's correct. So I'm just assuming that those additional people will be $100,000. So really what we're talking about here is $2,200,000 in new employees for taxes forever. Is that what we're talking about? Correct me if I'm wrong on that assumption, rounding that off at $100,000, an additional 2 million to in the salary.
Yeah, if I can, I'll answer that in two parts. From the perspective that what's in the tax rate in front of you now before these new positions for the 20 that we identified in the book, it's around $850,000. The reason for that is because there are revenues from other sources. There were contract savings and there was some reprioritizations. There was also some positions that won't start until October next year. To your point though, about what the gross cost is, I do think the 2 million is a fair, I don't have the exact tally for the 20 positions, but that would be a more fair representation of the total. Just noting though that a significant amount is identified in other forms.
So I think, Madam Chair, I've made my point, and I'm well aware there may not be hired until June or July or next October, but let me assure you, 2025, this council will still be here. It's going to be felt dramatically then, and I know what's being projected right now as at least a 12 or 14% increase at this point for 2025, and probably just as much, if not more, for 2026. And I'm talking about the term of this council. And I know this is not the time for statements, but I just want to be very clear as to what we're doing, adding more on to the future. So I make my point.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. First time speakers list, Councillor Tesser Dirksen is next.
Thank you, Madam Chair. A question about long-term staffing. So in traffic, and this might be a question that our CAO answers, about how the movement of staff that are currently in traffic would be affected by this position. Would it be affected? How would this position integrate with the staffing plans for the rest of the council term, for example?
Looking at our CAO for a response.
I mean, I can answer it or our commissioner can answer it, but there's no impact on any other. It's an additional capacity with an expertise that we presently don't have in that department.
Okay, thank you. We have Councillor Malbuff as the first time. Oh, Councillor Tess has a floor and has a follow-up question.
I do, thanks. Glenn, could you tell us what the dollar impact would be for this?
Yeah. So it would be $155,000 investment, which would be on a per $100,000 basis, 51 cents. At a local level, it would be a 0.17% increase. On the blended, it would be 0.07%.
Sorry, I'm trying to do quick math. So on the average, MPAC assessed home of $600,000 annually.
It would be around $3.
Okay, thank you.
Anything further, Councillor Tessa-Rickson? Okay, good. So I have Councillor Malbuff next.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll not be supporting this motion for the reason to echo the comments made by Councillor Challoner. Staff didn't see the need or the priority to include this in the budget. So I don't see it as a major priority or an issue. And my other concern is if we brought on this extra FTE for the senior traffic strategy, I suspect that when we look at it, we're going to hire an outside consultant anyways, just like we do with everything else. So I'll not be supporting that.
Thank you. I have Councillor Kalki next.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Just wondering if we could get the Commissioner Hogan to speak about the importance and this role a bit further in relation to what it would offer, what it would provide.
Commissioner Hogan.
Thank you, Councillor Kalki. It is a senior level position, and as the CAO said, we currently don't have that level of expertise in our division, and it's really a holistic position that would look at Milton as a whole from a transportation planning perspective with an eye to implement and be the lead on our broader transportation master plan and all of the active transportation initiatives and making all of those connections throughout town. As Councillor Kalki also said, we do have a number of very complex mixed use, higher density development applications. And those reviews do require a level of expertise that we don't currently have. We're making things work, but I think a position such as this could make things better. The goal is not to retain consultants to do this type of work and to do it in-house. And I do foresee potential savings in that regard moving forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. I have Councillor,
Yes,
Councillor Kalki still has the floor.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. And also when we get to the point for voting, if this could be a recorded vote, just so that's noted down. And secondly, again, for the cost, it was mentioned it's going to be at the $600,003.06. In turn, like Commissioner said, it's going to be investing back into the community for things like active transportation, cycling, creating those walkable communities that we all want to do with these high densities coming in, these new developments. It's a really important position, I feel, that we need to incorporate.
Thank you, Councillor Kalki. I have Councillor Challoner as the next speaker.
Yeah, just very quickly, we do have a requirement to have the applicant get involved in this process by hiring their own consultant. Maybe that's going to change. I don't know. I haven't talked to the commissioner about it. She may not be in a position to answer that question tonight. But at any rate, when I see the decline right now in high density construction in our community, where cranes are being pulled down, I don't think it's important this year. I'm not saying that it's never important. What I'm saying is let's talk about it in 2025 because we have enough on our plate in this budget. And at any rate, I will be curious down the road to see how this position integrates with what the development community is required to do by our corporation today. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Challoner. I have Councillor Tessa-Rickson next.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Two questions. Firstly, do comparator municipalities at the same level of progression as we are with respect to our development and growth have this type of position or a comparable position? Second question, and you may not be able to answer this, but do staff foresee a savings as a result of this position in the future? Is there a benefit to spending the money now?
The first part of your question, sorry.
If comparator municipalities.
I just wrote down yes, and then I'm like, so yes, comparable municipalities would have a position of this nature. In terms of future cost savings, I do think we would have the ability to leverage this position to reduce consulting fees. Councillor Challoner is correct. I mean, the development industry does do their own traffic impact studies. This position would lead more of the town initiated work, including the transportation master plan and active transportation strategy moving forward.
Councillor Tessler-Dixon.
I was debating whether to ask this question or not. Why did staff not put this position in their proposal?
Commissioner Hogan.
Thank you for the question. It was a position that I did put forward originally in the budget, and due to other competing interests, it was not put forward.
Anything further, Councillor Tessler-Dixon? Okay. Does our CEO want to add a comment?
No.
Okay, I'm seeing no other speakers to this motion, so a recorded vote has been asked for, and so I will leave it to the clerk to deal with that.
Thank you. For this recorded vote, I will ask all members in favor of the motion to please stand, and I will recognize you standing as in favor. Thank you. I'm seeing Councillor Kalki in favor, Councillor Best in favor, Councillor Marshall in favor, Councillor Tessler-Dirksen in favor, and Councillor Ali in favor. Thank you. Please be seated. I'll now ask members opposed to please stand. I'm seeing Mayor Krantz opposed, Councillor Challoner opposed, Councillor Melbuff opposed, Councillor Ajaz opposed. That motion is carried.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. We will now move on to the second amendment to the clause. It's a motion moved by Councillor Kalki, seconded by Councillor Melbuff, that a platoon chief, one full-time employee, be added to the 2024 operating budget with funding from the tax levy of $186,723. I will go to Councillor Kalki as the mover of the motion to speak.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Obviously, in the start, we heard a delegation advocating for fire services as well. So anyways, to move forward with this one, I think it's important as well, as one of the key items identified in our current fire master plan was the fact that we need to hire up to a total of 4 platoon fire chiefs in response to our forecasted municipal and department growth. We currently have 2 platoon fire chiefs, and the objective towards getting towards a total of 4 would secure sufficient incident command on a 24/7 basis. I want to highlight the importance of ensuring that we remain on track with this particular item, given that all of us have rapid growth coming into our communities, with particular means of growth being by way of high density development. It worries me when items like these are deferred, and I believe that it's important to ensure that we remain committed to our forecasted plans, especially as it pertains to our emergency services. Having said that, the importance of having sufficient incident command when responding to and dealing with an emergency situation is vital towards contributing towards the overall safety and well-being of our community. Having strong incident command allows for an emergency response to become more efficient, improves communication, span of control, and allows for a more organized and structured response to an emergency. I'm proud of the investments we've made thus far into fire. However, I feel like we need to move further right now, like I said, to ensure we have better staffing for our fire department to reach the targets outlined in our fire master plan. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Kalki. Councillor Melbuff as the seconder.
Right. Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm happy to second and support this motion. Number one priority of this council is not only the safety and protection of our residents, but of our employees as well. This position was included in our fire master plan that we had approved and should have been included in this budget. Removing this position to save $186,000 while we're spending nearly $1 million on an arts center, to me, doesn't make sense. But maybe I have my priorities wrong. But, so I would ask this council to support this motion and support our fire department.
Thank you, Councillor Melboff. I have a speaker, Councillor Challoner next.
Thanks, Madam Chair. I won't be supporting the motion. The fire master plan is unfortunately, I don't want to say that it's completely irrelevant, but it's becoming irrelevant. As I explained earlier when I was asked about supporting this motion, the 6 individuals who are now a part of the 911 program were not a part of that master plan. Things have changed, and the master plan needs to be changed to reflect that, unfortunately. And again, I go back to, we don't have the population, we don't have the level of development of activity. We have a fire station that isn't being fully utilized today. And we can't wait 12 months to reconsider this when staff have recommended that it be put off for 12 months. That's all they're asking us to do. And that's all we're asking of ourselves. And when you look at the metrics don't support today the demand for this position immediately. The metrics today support the need for 6 people to get us into the 21st century with a 911 system that wasn't contemplated in the last fire master plan. So, you know, in addition to that, I go back to, and I'm sorry if it comes across as a harangue, but our current economic situation demands that we be fiscally responsible, more so than ever before. And it's not going to make a difference in 12 months. We're not at risk. If we were at any kind of risk, we'd be hearing from the insurance companies of Canada, and we'd be hearing from our residents because the cost of insuring their homes and their businesses would be going up. They aren't, as a result of our fire service support in this community. We have excellent fire service support. We can wait until the 2025 budget to look at this. And as I indicated, and as we all know, things have changed. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Challoner. I have Councillor Adil Kalki next.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, if I could maybe ask a question to the fire chief, if he could further, speak to the importance of what this role would entail if it was added back into the budget. And given the fact that it's not in the budget as it stands right now, if we weren't funding the communication staff, would we still be having this investment being put into the budget if that wasn't there?
Thank you, Chief Gatto. I see you at the podium. Please proceed.
Thank you, Madam Chair. To the role of platoon chief reports directly to the deputy fire chief, functions as a supervisor who coordinates, supervises, and participates in firefighting related activities, and coordinates between the other divisions, public education, prevention, training, and other activities. Platoon chief's primary role is emergency response. I think that was already discussed. And they improve the scene through communication, span of control, and they delineate on-scene personnel's roles and responsibilities. Platoon chiefs they're specialized experts in leadership and incident command. They manage complex incidents. A complex incident would be a high-rise fire, a large industrial fire, a firefighter mayday, a rescue, and they ultimately contribute to the overall safety and well-being of our community. They also have administrative tasks that offset the workload of the deputy chiefs. They improve also our effective response force because it allows the captains to work at a tactical level while the incident commander works at a strategic level, and also creates an extra layer of management during large-scale disasters and supports our emergency operations center.
Thank you, Chief. Anything further, Councillor Kalki?
Yes, thank you, Chief, for that. So obviously that right there speaks to the gravity of what this role would entail and how important it is. And making sure we get to where we need to be will help us get to that point where we have 24/7 incident command and adequate emergency response. Again, emergency services, they get paid for what they're expected to do many of the times compared to what they're actually doing. And when an emergency happens, which is obviously hard to predict, it's really, really important that we have those resources. This would bring us a step closer towards fulfilling our requirements under the master plan, which was created obviously for a particular reason to satisfy the growth and that we're seeing in the community.
Thank you, Councillor Cucky. Thank you, Chief. Next on my speakers list is Councillor Best.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. And I support the motion here, and especially Councillor Malvo's comments as well. You know, staff have presented the budget and the best of their ability. We have to look at it and where, not only how much, but also where we're spending our money. I initially would have supported just 6 firefighters, as the chief mentioned. Unfortunately, wasn't able to get that in time, but I certainly support the 1 platoon chief. But I could sympathize with Councillor Challoner's concerns. It may be reduced in residential, but all you have to do is go along James Snow Parkway and 5th Line and see the millions of square feet of construction going on right now from large corporations with buildings that when a firefighter gets there, we don't know what's in there unless they have the planning and the staffing ahead of time to plan out how to fight a fire. Because when you have a 1 million square foot building, as we've seen by some on Brownie Street North recently, you don't know what's in there. And unless you have the staff that have the experience and training, you might be sending someone in there to be injured or killed if you don't know how to do it right. So I certainly support this, and I support anticipating ahead of time, not reacting after the fact.
Thank you, Councillor Best. Councillor Jazz is next.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This is a question for staff. The 6 firefighters, the individuals that are being added to NG 911, when do they start? Do they get employed in the upcoming year, or when the SIR program goes to? Yeah.
So of the 6, there are 2 that are expected to be part of the project implementation. So they would start earlier in the year in February, and they're funded from capital. The tax dollars for all 6 positions begins at the start of October next year and then annualizes fully in 2025.
Anything further, Councillor Jazz?
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Okay, Councillor Kalki's next.
Thanks, Madam Chair. 2 things. 1, again, recorded vote for this one as well, please. And 2, it wasn't brought up by any of the other council, but I want to talk about the cost associated to this. And Glenn, feel free to correct me if I'm wrong here, but what I have here is this would impact the overall rate by 0.21%, change the blended to 0.08%, which would equate to a 61 cent per 100,000 residential assessment value increase. So if my math is correct here at that 600,000 number, it'll be $3.66 to fund this particular position. Is that correct on your end as well?
Correct.
Okay, I'm glad we have that clarity now. I'm looking around and seeing if any of my other colleagues have any questions. I'm seeing none, so a recorded vote has been called, and I will leave it to the clerk to take it from here.
Thank you. I'd like to ask all members who are in favor of the motion to please stand. Okay. I see Councillor Kolke in favor of the motion, Councillor Best in favor of the motion, Councillor Marshall in favor of the motion, Councillor Melbuff in favor of the motion, Councillor Tesser-Dirksen in favor of the motion, Councillor Jazz in favor of the motion. Can I now please ask members to be seated? Oh, Councillor Lee, excuse me, in favor of the motion. Can I now ask for members who are opposed to please stand? And I'm seeing Councillor Challoner opposed and Mayor Krantz opposed. That motion is carried.
Thank you, colleagues. That motion is carried. As the clerk just mentioned, we will move on to the next motion, which is basically an amendment to clause 4A. It is moved by Councillor Tesser-Dirksen and seconded by Councillor. Oh, I see them. I apologize.
Yeah, just before you move on, Madam Chair, there with regards to what just happened in those 2 or 3 previous motions, I'd like to know the total and what impact that has, because the next 2 are reasonably complicated. I think I've got it figured out, but I think it's important on bottom line where we're presently at, because I think we're getting very, very close to double digits. 9.5 is close enough for me to call it double digits, but I think we're inching closer to it. So good gosh only knows on the next 2 motions what may or may not happen. So little clarity on what the possibility is on the assumption that the next 2 motions were to pass, and if they didn't pass, what impact is this already got on what we just passed?
Thank you, Mayor Kranz. I know that I saw our financial team crunching numbers all along, so I'm pretty sure they have a number ready for us.
We do. At the local level, we are sitting at 9.88%. On the blended level, we're at 5.93%. We've added $1.11 per 100,000 of assessment, so $6.66 on an average house.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Any other questions or comments from my colleagues? Okay, seeing none, I will move on to the next motion, which is moved by Councillor Tesser Dirksen and seconded by Councillor Marshall, that the transfer from the tax stabilization reserve to the 2024 operating budget be reduced by $750,000 with an equivalent increase in the net tax levy in order to fund the related ongoing expenses. I've read the motion. I will go to the mover of the motion, Councillor Tesser Dirksen now.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Well, this motion certainly isn't as shiny as the other two. It's a little bit dry, but frankly, it's a motion about sound financial management. And in reviewing the budget, I had noticed that 1.7 million was being transferred from the tax rate stabilization reserve fund in order to mitigate the impact to taxpayers. That bothered me a little bit going into the projections for next year and the year after that and the year after that. In speaking to staff, originally this motion, I was debating 1.5 million. And when we looked at the numbers, we just had to take into consideration what kind of impact that was going to have on the average person. So the figure we arrived at was $750,000. And to continue to pull from the tax rate stabilization reserve bothers me for a number of reasons. Number one, it doesn't align with our financial management policies, which we have committed to, which we have. And we have significant pressures going into next year. We've already heard 2023 and 2024 are going to be similar. 2025, 2026, probably worse. And I have heard some talk that, 2027, 2028, it's going to level out. I don't have a crystal ball. All it takes is another pandemic, another war that affects supply chain, inflation. I don't want to kick this can down the road. I want us to stare it in the face and make the difficult decision to be, well, it shouldn't be a difficult decision to make sound financial decisions for our residents and for ourselves. So that's the basis of this motion. As far as a dollar amount, I'm really focused on the dollar impact, the wallet impact to the average person. And we figured that it was $14.68, I believe, for the average home per year. That averages out to, I think, $1.22 a month. In order for us to say to our residents that we thought hard and long about how we're managing their money, how we're managing our reserves. And I think it's something that I can certainly justify to residents, and I'm sure others can too. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Tesser. The seconder of the motion, Councillor Marshall.
So Christina, Councillor Tesser Dirksen had the chance to take all the excellent talking points, but I just want to remind everybody that when we looked at this exact thing last year, that we said we were going to defer payment until this year, and now we're here. So I want everybody to just remember what type of planning was intended at this time last year before deciding what to do this year. And is it actually worth deferring this till next year or the year after, when we've already seen what those potential impacts are going to be?
Thank you, Councillor Marshall. I'm looking around to see if any of my other colleagues have any comments to add. Councillor Challoner has a comment.
Thanks, Madam Chair. I won't be supporting the motion. And, I really wish individual members of council would get away from what this is costing per unit or per program or per individual, because taxpayers look at the cumulative effect, the bottom line. And at this point, we're going to be well over 6%, well over 10% if we do this. It is not good financial management to not use this without something to replace it with. It's poor financial management. And I indicated, and I don't know how many people read the Q&As, but you'll recall if you attended the last meeting, I talked to the treasurer about establishing two income funds, essentially to replace the tax stabilization rate reserve as a revenue source for the operating budget, and to replace the non-growth reserve with an income fund so that it is funded that way and not through the operating budget. That's good financial management. We have a revenue problem, and we have done nothing in this budget to address that. And it's the second time that we've had this in the last 3 years. I'd forgotten about 2021, but we had a problem then too. It was fairly obvious what it was. You know, in my view, if Councillor Marshall and Councillor Tester Dirksen said this is the last year, I would support that. But at this point, that's not what they're asking. We simply can't afford to do that. And please don't, you know, say things like it's only $14 a month or whatever it is. It's meaningless. What is the cumulative effect of this budget on taxpayers? Everything else is pointless, mindless, quite frankly, and insulting. If they said this is the last year, they've got my support, because in January, we're going to have as a council a workshop where we're going to discuss these income funds and how they could replace the tax stabilization reserve. I agree with Councillor Tester Dirksen. This is not how it should be used. The treasurer knows that. I've made that clear. It's here to deal with end of year balance issues. Yes, you can use it for the purpose we've been using it for the last 10 years, but it's not good fiscal management. And so I can't support this. I have thought long and hard about an alternative. I've been discussing it with the CAO and the treasurer since the summertime. This is a serious issue. And what is being proposed is not good financial management. What we will discuss in January is a move in the right direction towards good financial management, and I hope it's something that happens. So I can't support this, and I apologize.
Thank you, Councillor Challoner. I have Councillor Ijaz as the next speaker.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I respectfully disagree with the proposal to reduce the transfer from the tax stabilization reserve to the 2024 operating budget by $750,000 with an equivalent increase in the net tax levy. This adjustment will result in a higher tax increase for Milton residents, placing an added burden on taxpayers. On a separate note, we started with the mayor's budget, which aligns seamlessly with the council's requested budget direction of 9.5%. Now, with the previous additions, the tax increase is standing at 9.88%, and I can support that. But anything above this 9.88%, I cannot support. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you for your comments, Councillor Ijaz. I have Councillor Kalki next.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Just wondering if CFO can comment on this particular item and how it is in terms of financial management and the particular move that's being made here.
So the biggest effect of this, if it were approved, would be the relief in future years' budgets where we are forecasting pressures that are higher than what is currently being contemplated for approval for 2024. I do think that, as recommended, it is a reasonable and appropriate use of stabilization fund if there is a concrete plan to unwind it while there's still funding in that reserve balance. But ultimately, from a revenue perspective, looking at service levels and sustainable revenue sources, it really is only meant to bridge from what the tax rate currently is to what it needs to be to support the service levels that there are. As to how quickly we go there, it really is a decision of council, weighing the factors such as what is a reasonable change at the property tax base, what service levels are expected, and how long we can sustain drawing from that stabilization reserve. Right now, you'll see in the forecast, it is shown to go from right now around the target balance, around $8 million, to around 4.6 million after we've used this for a few years of phasing it out. What one of the benefits of this motion would be is additional funding in that stabilization reserve balance closer to the target when we come out of the next few years of pressures. So ultimately, you know, there is a number of different answers here, and ultimately the council can decide which is the most appropriate.
Thank you to our CFO for that answer. Councillor Ijaz is next.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This is a question for Glenn. If this motion were to pass, what would that 9.88% increase to?
So the 9.88 would become 10.72 from a local tax rate change perspective. The blended total would become 6.27%. which is $46 per 100,000 of assessment. And sorry, just scrolling down, $276 from an average house perspective.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Giles. Any other speakers to the motion? Councillor Best.
Yeah, just as Councillor Challoner raised some interesting points here regarding our reserves. What is the return that we're getting on our reserves and reserve funds? I take it they are all invested. I just want to see how that compares with a potential income fund.
Looking at the CFO for a response.
So within the budget, we've assumed from the overall portfolio perspective, a total return averaging 3.95% next year. That would be the highest amount we've realized in recent years, in part because we're going to be starting the year with the relatively high rates that we have today, especially on the shorter term investments. Keeping in mind that the portfolio is a mix of the more liquid funding that we have in those savings accounts versus the longer term investments that we're already locked into. In terms of that income fund, I do think, and our suggestion was to explore that further in the workshop setting so we could make sure we're addressing council's intentions with it. The thing we'll have to be balancing in that is that the seed funding for that fund is likely to come from those existing reserves, which are already being invested, and ideally to maximize the return that we can get, given when the timing of the draw on those reserves may be.
Thank you for the answer. Just a last question. In terms of provincial regulations and OMB regulations, what are the limitations we have on investments?
So the primary investment tool for municipalities are areas in fixed income in terms of, especially in the bond market. There has been introductions to allow for equity in one of two ways, either through the One Fund, which is a professionally managed investment tool for municipalities. That's the one that our current town bylaw currently allows for. And then separately, there's the prudent investment standard, which we're not entertaining at this stage, given the size of our portfolio and the costs and the process involved. We also do invest in other investment tools such as the savings account reference, GICs, but it's very much a fixed income oriented strategy. And then within our own town guidelines are the limitations in terms of how much exposure to federal provincial notes, how much to the corporate and banking sector, and the overall balance that we're allowed to work within.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Best. I have Councillor Tessa Hendrickson next.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Just to note, Councillor Challoner is correct in that there's nothing wrong with looking for additional revenue sources, and I'm fully supportive of that. If we find a way to fund an income reserve or an income fund, I would be supportive if it was reasonable and made sense. However, like I said, I don't want to kick this down the can because an income reserve is not guaranteed. We don't know where we're going to get the seed money from. If the income reserve fund works out, great, we'll have an easier year next year, in addition to this motion. And if it doesn't go ahead, we'll still have an easier time next year because of this motion.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Tessa Hendrickson. I have Councillor Challoner next.
Thanks. So again, it's in the notes. The CFO talked about a One Fund, and the return on that is significant compared to the investments we currently have, double of many of them. The seed money, yes, would come from our current reserves. But for example, if it came from a GIC that was maturing at 1.5%, you're far better off taking that $10 or $15 million and putting it into the One Fund, because you're going to see a pretty rapid return within 12 months. And there are other funds as well that I'm sure the CFO is looking at, contemplating my questions. I don't, the main issue I have is, yes, we are kicking the can down the road. We've been kicking it down the road for the last decade. Again, there's a table in there that shows what we've been doing. I'm not confident that without an income fund or a revenue source that we won't kick the can down next year, because what I see too much of is a lack of fiscal discipline. And, it's a shared responsibility. It starts with senior staff and it concludes around this table. And quite frankly, the most important place it has to occur is here. And I don't see that happening. I don't have that confidence. And I think that simple logic and common sense is you end it as soon as you have a plan to end it with. And I'm hoping that in January, we put the pins in place as a council to provide financial stability for future generations by considering what I've been proposing to senior staff. Because I'm as frustrated by this as anybody else around this table is, maybe even more. I go back, I reflect on the time, my first 15 years here, we never did this kind of stuff. We didn't blend our tax rate with the region. We stood up and we managed budgets as they were. We didn't look for any kind of subsidy within or without. And we need to get back to as much of that as we possibly can, because we don't know what's ahead of us. Councillor Tester-Dirksen is exactly right. We don't know what's going to happen in the next couple of years. I don't have confidence, quite frankly, that any of our future projections are accurate. And I don't know how they can be unless you've got some sort of special crystal ball. And so I'm not criticizing the CFO. He's doing the best job he possibly can under very difficult circumstances. But what that demands is a plan that brings in revenue on a consistent basis, where you aren't robbing Peter to pay Paul, which is exactly what we're doing with the stabilization reserve. So my message: suck it up for one more year. Let's figure it out in January and let's get going. But I'm not in favor of this motion.
Thank you, Councillor Challoner. I'm looking around to see if any of my other colleagues have any comments, questions to add. I'm seeing none, so no recorded vote has been called for, so I'm going to call the vote now. All those in favor of this motion, please raise your hand. All those opposed? Motion fails. We are now moving on to the next motion, which will be the last motion to clause 4A. And it is moved by Councillor Challoner and seconded by Councillor Malbuff. Whereas the proposed Town of Milton 2024 property tax increase, when blended with the regional municipality of Halton and school board's 2024 operating budgets, will net out at 5.37%. If the region and the school board's budgets are approved as is. And whereas the proposed 2024 Town of Milton property tax increase, when blended with the regional municipality of Halton school boards and proposed Halton Regional Police Services operating budgets, could net out at about 5.78% if they are approved as proposed. And whereas Milton is in economic recession, interest rates are high, food inflation is continuing unabated, and an increasing number of Miltonians are defaulting on their mortgages and not paying their property taxes. Therefore, be it resolved that in order to provide financial relief to hard-hit Milton families, the Town of Milton 2024 operating budget achieve a 5% blended property tax rate objective, and further be it resolved that the 36 million purchased goods and services line items in the 2024 Town of Milton operating budget be reduced in order to achieve a 5% blended tax rate total, requiring an estimated reduction of $825,000 to $1,770,000, depending on the final budgets established for Halton Region and the Halton Regional Police Service. I have read the motion and you can see it on the screen as well. I will now go to the mover of the motion to speak to the motion. Councillor Challoner.
Thanks, Madam Chair. As staff will and council recall from last year when I brought this forward, staff didn't love this. I can tell you they still don't. Reluctant was the word I got back, and I understand that. But when I saw where we were netting out, and when I see where we're netting out tonight, we don't have the revenue. And when you don't have the revenue, you've got to deal with your expenses as well. And all of our leading indicators are falling at this point. And, what are we doing to try to bring ourselves into balance? And while I support a lot of the things that are in the new budget, the new proposed budget, I think we have to take a look at those auxiliary things that we're spending on. And much of it is in that $36 million purchase goods and services budget. And take a hard look at it and provide some discipline that way. And this is the least challenging way to deal with that. Where does that notion come from? Well, I spent, 40 years in business. Not all of them were rosy years. I spent most of my career in technology in the 90s and the 2000s, and we had some pretty tough times, 80s as well. And whenever, revenue was not going to make the expense line had to get cut. You had to balance the budget, you had to make money. And typically that's where you started first. You avoided going to head count. Sometimes we had to. And I'm not proposing that this evening at all. But, I'm supportive of, for example, of the 6 positions to deal with 911. The benefits of that are going to be groundbreaking. So that is it in a nutshell. We're in a tough place with our economy. I think that we need to swing a little bit harder at our operating budget when we look at places to reduce. I don't think that we've necessarily looked hard enough. We've reduced proposed spending, but we haven't reduced actual spending. And that's why I brought it forward. What is my sense of optimism about this passing tonight? Low. But I want you to know that I was thinking about it, that there are ways around this, but it takes, a little creativity and leadership, quite frankly. And I know there's a lot of people in Milton right now who are hurting. I hear from them. And they're looking to us to help them in a very difficult year, which may prove to be a couple of difficult years. Thanks.
Thanks, Councillor Challoner. Councillor Melbuff as the seconder.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I agreed to second the motion to get this on the floor and wanted to see exactly where we were going. But based on the numbers that are in the motion and everything else, we're way over that, and we're not going to hit those numbers. So I don't know if the motion is redundant or what. I mean, there are a lot of areas that we could be using to reduce the tax burden for our residents. Outside consultants. I believe we spend too much money on outside consultants. There's a way there. Our facilities, our sports facilities, the arts center, can't we make those more efficient and cost effective to reduce the costs on taxpayers? Private sector sports centers break even or make money. For some reason, our facilities, we lose $4 million a year. We have a transit system that costs $7.7 million a year. That's used by less than 2% of our population. Okay, that comes out to about $3,500 a person, a ride. We can buy them each a car for less than that. So there are a lot of areas, but unfortunately, I can't see that happening. The political will is not there. So we're already at almost 10%, and it's that's as high as I can go. So I'll support the budget the way it stands now, but hopefully this will be the end of it.
Thank you, Councillor Melbuff. Councillor Jazz is next.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This is a question for Glenn. Glenn, can you tell us if, so I saw the blended rate, but what would be the local rate if this was to happen?
So maybe just quickly before speaking to the rates, one quick update. So when we provided the range that's in the motion itself up to 1.77, that was based on what potential changes could happen at the region. One thing I hadn't factored in when helping provide that number was what other decisions may have occurred here tonight. So with the two amendments that have been made to date, it would be a $2.1 million reduction in the purchase services and goods to achieve the 5% blended, assuming again that the region finalizes at the current number. The ultimate impact of this motion won't be able to be fully calculated until after the region's gone through their entire process. But right now it would be 2.1 million. So on that basis, what it would mean at a local level would be a 7.55% change in our local budget with that $2 million removed. And then the blended would come to that 5% number that is in the intended target.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Glenn.
Thank you, Councillor Jazz. Next is Councillor Best.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. Just a question regarding this. I understand where Councillor Melville and Challoner are coming from, but to staff, either the CAO or treasurer, the 36 million, you're looking 2.1. What impact would this have, and what risks do you see in this?
I'll field that one first. I see it as significant. In order to arrive at the 36 million, there's already been a number of reductions, not just in purchase goods and services, but across the board in the budget process. Some of the specific areas that help get us to that $1 million reduction were in areas like the utilities that we're purchasing at the facilities, at some of the IT contracts. So some of the very items that are in here. So 2.1 million out of that 36. When you look at which services we're spending that external funding on, it's in road operations, it's in transit, it's in our facilities, and it's in our IT as our biggest areas of spend. And so to achieve 2.1, it would result in service level impacts. I'm confident saying that, even though we haven't gone through the exercise yet to identify specifically where we would go about that. Because of service level changes being involved, ultimately we would bring that back to council, as that's really where service level decisions are best made.
Anything further, Councillor Best?
Well, maybe the CAO could comment on this.
Yeah, I would just add the most important piece was the ending to Glenn's statement is that we'd be looking for council to identify those service level cuts.
Hey, just to inform council that to my knowledge that there is no more proposed changes at the regional council. I don't believe anyone's adding or subtracting. So what you see being proposed, the regional council is what's going to come through. Unfortunately, the police are looking at hiring 48 new officers. So that's where the major increase is going to be. Plus, we also have inflation. I believe, if I'm correct in hearing from staff, 80% of our budget is due to inflation. And having approved two other budgets recently, a lot of these costs aren't going down. We're going to be increasing, not decreasing. So looking at some, I appreciate where Councillor Challoner is coming from, but it's going to be very difficult on this unless we're looking at some major service cuts.
Thank you, Councillor Best. Are there any other comments or questions on this motion? I am seeing none, so I will call the vote now. All those in favor of this motion, Councillor Challoner? All those in favor of this motion, please raise your hand. All those opposed? Motion fails. With this, ladies and gentlemen, we come to the end of the motions or amendments to clause 4A. And I can confirm that all motions on the 2024 operating budget of town and library, which was clause 4A, are now complete. At this point, I'm going to go to our CFO to see if he can give us a final number where we are in the budget so that all of my council colleagues are on the same page on the budget numbers. Yes,
so our local change is a 9.88% change. The blended total change is 5.93%. The total dollars per 100,000, and this is including the estimated regional amount, would be $43.60 per 100,000. So for the average house of 600,000, it would be $261.62.
Thank you for that update. Are there any other staff members who want to speak to any of these items before we proceed? I'm seeing none. I know that my colleagues are eager to share their statements on the budget that will come in the near future, but we have to go through many more clauses before we get to the point. I just wanted to clarify that. I know how eager my colleagues are. With this, we will now move on to clause 4B. And this is where Councillor Best declared a conflict. And then you can see him sliding way back over there. Clause 4B states that the 2024 operating budget for seniors program salaries and benefits in the amount of $39,512 be received for review and any amendments made by council. Are there any motions to be considered in relation to this clause? I'm seeing none, so I'm going to call the vote on this. No, there's no vote. Yeah, we are going to move on to clause 5. Councillor Best is welcome to slide right over. Clause 5 states that if the actual net taxable assessment growth is different than 2.29%, any increase in the tax dollars generated from the town portion of assessment growth for 2024 taxation be transferred to the tax rate stabilization reserve, or any decrease in tax dollars generated from the town portion of assessment growth for 2024 taxation be funded from the tax rate stabilization reserve. And I'm pretty sure I have now read that. Are there any motions to be considered in relation to this clause, which is clause 5? I'm seeing none. I will now move on to clause 6. Clause 6 states that the non-union salary range adjustment for 2024 be approved at a rate of 2.1%. Are there any motions to be considered in relation to this clause? I'm seeing none, so I'm going to move on to clause 7. Clause 7 states that the 2025-2026 operating forecast for the town, including the library, with a combined net increase in the tax levy of 27.1 million as outlined in Appendix 5 of this report, or as potentially revised, be received. And on this, I do have an amendment to the clause, which is a motion moved by Councillor Challoner and seconded by Councillor Marshall. And I'm going to read that motion now. That staff be directed to prepare a report for council that outlines alternatives for a multi-year financial strategy for the town that can be used as a basis to guide future budget processes, and that a council workshop to discuss the alternatives be held in advance of the presentation of the report to council, and that the staff report be presented to council for consideration no later than June 2024. And finally, that an annual financial workshop occur in June or July to discuss pertinent financial information, as well as facilitate pre-budget discussions. I have read the motion. I will go now to the mover of the motion, Councillor Challoner.
Thanks, Madam Chair. I think it's pretty straightforward. I just want to thank the CFO, the CAO, Councillor Marshall and Councillor Tesser-Dirksen for their leadership in this discussion.
Thank you, Councillor Challoner. Seconder, Councillor Marshall.
I would agree. It's pretty straightforward.
Thank you, Councillor Marshall. Are there any comments or questions on this motion? I'm seeing none, so I'll call the vote. All those in favor? Motion passes unanimously. Are there any further motions to be considered in relation to clause 7 related to the 2025-2026 operating forecast? I'm seeing no other motions, so I'm going on to move on to clause 8. Clause 8 states that the transfers to and from reserves and reserve funds within the 2024 budget, as outlined in Appendix 6 or as potentially revised, be received. Are there any motions to be considered in relation to this clause? I see none. Moving on to clause 9. Clause 9 states that the Milton BIA budget in the gross amount of $487,675, resulting in a net tax levy of $270,990, as outlined in Appendix 7, be received for review and any amendments made by council. Are there any motions to be considered in relation to this clause? I am seeing none. Okay, so this was clause 9. And at this point, I would like to say that all motions are complete. And now we will move to vote on the motions as revised. And in advance of us calling the final vote on the motions as amended, I will now ask the CFO for an updated slide on where the numbers for the operating and capital budget sit. And of course, pursuant to that, will be the opportunity for my colleagues to share their comments and statements. Glenn.
So coming up on the screen now is a reflection of the figures that we verbally spoke about just a few moments ago. And we can leave the slide up during the comments just so it's an easier reference for council. But as mentioned, it's a 9.88% change at the local level and a 5.93% projected impact at the total level with the other levels of government as well, which translates to $43.60 per 100,000 of assessment, or 261 on the average household.
Thank you, Glenn. I am sure my colleagues had a chance to look at the screen, all the numbers up there in the graphic. And I will now go to my colleagues to see if they have any comments or statements. I have Mayor Krantz to my right. Mr. Mayor.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, Madam Chair. And again, in the agenda that was sent out with the recommendations, I don't see, and of course, I know it's changed tonight from 9.5 to 9.88 and the rest that's in there. How will that be incorporated in the staff recommendation there and those 9 points that you've been alluding to? I know in the executive summary, it covers it off, but I want to be very clear because it's bottom line that I'm concerned about. And again, I think I've made it very clear to anybody that wants to listen that I was never in support of 9.5 and certainly never in support now of 9.88, or I'm going to round it off at 10%. So I'm going to round it off as so. Because there's certain things in those 9 things that I support, but I don't support 9.88. So, and I'm not suggesting breaking every one of them out again separately and deal with, but bottom line, I don't support 988. As an example, we were circulated, and Glenn alluded to this earlier on this evening, some of the comments from individuals, and these aren't my words. They're talking about tax increases as unacceptable more than once and outrageous. I could probably add, other expletives to what we may be doing here tonight, but I'm not going to do that. And again, as you know, Madam Chair, I signed off of the strong mayor's issue, and the clerk will get to that in just a few moments on waiving some of the rights that I could have had. But I did reserve the right to change my mind at any time. And the clerk knows that as well. But it's not my intention to do that. I'm a firm believer in majority rules. And if the majority of this council wants to put up 10%, so be it. I won't be supporting that, but other than that, I have no thoughts on it. I just don't want to be part of a spendthrift council. I'll make that very, very clear. CEO is well aware of that, of my sentiments, and growing bureaucracy by leaps and bounds. In this particular case, 22 additional new people on top of what, 600 or 700 people that's already here. I was never part of that. Never wanted to be part of it. Never will be part of a growing government. So other than that, I have no thoughts. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you for sharing your sentiments with us. I have Councillor Jazz next.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This might be unorthodox, but I put something together, so I think this is the right time to state it. In the town of Milton, where growth unfolds, a tale of inflation, its narrative holds. Infrastructure's embraced, services dance, yet the cost of progress a circumstance. Inflation whispers through the bustling streets, a reality that municipal balance greets. Taxes rise, a necessary tune to fortify foundation under the crescent moon. Bridges of progress, roads paved in dreams, yet the fiscal river turbulent it seems. To maintain the heartbeat of the town's core, taxes ascend, a fiscal metaphor. For schools that bloom and parks that thrive, inflation's challenge they must survive. A town's embrace expanding sphere, taxes climb, a pathway clear. And the echo of growth, a fiscal verse. In Milton's heartbeat, the people's purse. Inflation's dance, a complex song. Taxes rise, a town grows strong.
Thank you, Councillor Jazz. Before I call the vote on the clauses we just deliberated, I would wish to look around again and see if any of my colleagues have any comments or statements to add. Councillor Kalki.
Thanks, Madam Chair. I'll just keep it brief. I'm happy of the investments that we're making here, and appreciate all those that supported those three motions earlier as well. It's an investment in road safety, it's an investment in traffic staffing, it's an investment in fire services, amongst the other, items that are in the budget as it is. I'm supportive of the budget and I look forward to, again, in future budgets, just continuing to be the best advocate I can be for the community and making investments that we need to get to where we need to be by 2051. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Kalki. Certainly, those investments have been included in the budget. Mayor Krantz.
It's on the overall budget, Madam Chair. I'm calling for a recorded vote on that as well. Thank you.
Clerk has noted that. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm seeing none of my colleagues have any other comments or statements to add, so a recorded vote has been called and I will leave it to the clerk to deal with that.
So with respect to clauses 1 through 9, excluding item 4B.
I see Councillor Best has a comment to add.
I just wanted to make sure you've excluded my conflict. Thank you.
Yes,
Thank you, Councillor.
thanks for pointing that out.
So again, clauses 1 through 9, excluding 4B due to the conflict, I would ask all members who are in favor of the motion to please stand. In favor, I see Councillor Kalki, Councillor Best, Councillor Marshall, Councillor Malbuff, Councillor Tesser-Dirksen, Councillor Ajaz, Councillor Ali. Thank you. If you please be seated. Members opposed, please stand. Opposed, I'm seeing Mayor Krantz and Councillor Challoner. That motion carries.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. We will now call the vote on Clause B separately, or Clause 4B separately. It is moved by Councillor Malbuff and seconded by Councillor Kalki that the 2024 operating budget for seniors program salaries and benefits in the amount of $39,512 be received for review and any amendments made by council. All those in favor of this motion? And that's carried. Thank you. We have now finalized all 9 clauses, including clause 4B. We will move to clause 10. And but I will, the clause 10 will confirm that there are no further amendments from members of council. And I will read clause 10 and then I will go to our CFO to add a little bit of information to clause 10 for clarification, because it is a little bit confusing here. Clause 10, that for the purposes of the 2024 budget, the 30-day period referred to in subsection 6 of Ontario Regulation 530/22 be shortened such that it is considered expired at the time of council approval of this resolution on December 4th, 2023. Glenn, can you please explain?
Yes, so this is a new resolution this year specific for the new legislation. In previous years, the last vote would have been a vote to approve the entire budget and the budget process would have been complete. This year, it was only to approve amendments to the proposed budget. There's still the remaining legislative timelines. So essentially with approval of this clause, and especially given that there's no further planned council meetings between now and when the time period would naturally expire, by having this vote tonight, it allows us to confirm that the period for amendments is finalized and proceed with the remaining legislative steps, the next of which would be the 10-day period where the mayor can make vetoes.
Mayor Krantz.
Yeah, Madam Chair, I've already confirmed with the clerk that I'm signing off on this. And again, I spoke to it earlier on. Democracy is alive and well here this evening. Even though I lost hope, my wishes, but that's democracy. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Any other further questions of clarification to the CFO on this clause from anybody? I'm seeing none, so I'm going to call the vote on this. All those in favor of clause 10. And that is carried. With the approval of this motion, I can announce that council's period to amend the proposed budget as described in Ontario Regulation 530/22 is hereby concluded. And with that, members of council, we were going to go on a brief recess and we will reconvene shortly. Thank you. I would like to request my members of council colleagues that we are back from the recess. We are back from the recess and I have just received the signed declaration from the mayor to shorten the time to veto any motions, such as the timeline expires on December 4th. And at this time, through the mayor's signing of the declaration received by the town clerk as part of public record, the 2024 budget for the town of Milton is hereby finalized. And with this, we'll move on to our regular business items on the agenda. Before me, I have staff reports URS 05823, Ontario Regulation 28409. It is moved by Councillor Malbouf and seconded by Councillor Kalki that the compliance report for the expenses excluded from the 2024 budget outlined in report CRS 05723 be approved as a requirement of Ontario Regulation 28409 passed under the Municipal Act of 2001. Are there any questions or comments to this motion? I'm seeing none, so I'm going to call the vote. All those in favor? And that passes. With that, we move on to the bylaw section. I have a motion moved by Councillor Malbouf, seconded by Councillor Kalki, that bylaw number 091/2023 be read, passed, and numbered, and that the mayor and the town clerk be authorized to sign the said bylaw, seal it with the seal of the corporation, and that they be engrossed by the bylaw book. Are there any questions and comments from my colleagues on this? I'm seeing none. I'm going to call the vote. All those in favor? That passes. And with all business concluded for this agenda, ladies and gentlemen, this meeting is now adjourned. Thank you. Mr. Mayor has a comment.
Just before you adjourn, I just want to thank you, Madam Chair, for doing an excellent job on the budget. It's not an easy job. I know that you've been involved with staff on getting this whipped into shape for some time. So I just want to acknowledge that. And And Glenn and all the senior staff has taken a lead role on a lot of this. It hasn't been easy, and I know staff been working on this for many weeks and many months. With that, I take the privilege, and this doesn't have to be an open session, of course, but one of your and my colleagues is celebrating a very special day today, and I'm not sure whether you're aware or not, but I know Councillor Ijaz has become more mature today because today is his birthday. So
Mayor, it's actually my birthday,
Your-
Councillor Calke's
I thought
birthday,
it
not
was-
Councillor Ijaz's birthday. Yeah.
He
He matured a long time ago. I still have some work to do. Yeah.
He then as well become a little bit more mature. The information that I got was Councillor Ijaz. So I just want to congratulate Councillor Kalki on becoming more mature as of today. So I think that refers to becoming a little older as well. So.
Councillor Kalki, want to share a few sentiments?
No, absolutely. Thank you very much for the birthday wish. Much appreciated. And thank you for recognizing that I've matured. I appreciate that. Yeah.
Mr. Mayor, I can confirm we can all use a little bit of maturity here. Thank you. Thank you so much, Mr. Mayor. Thank you for your comments and highlighting our colleague's birthday. I have Councillor Ijaz now wishing to speak.
Yeah, I wishing to speak and wishing you a happy birthday. Had I known earlier, I would have wrote you a poem.
Thank you, Councillor Ijaz. I would take this moment to congratulate our staff, especially our senior staff, our CEO, Andrew Sutula, for running a tight ship here, and all of our senior management team, all of our commissioners, all of your directors. You work so hard, and certainly we see that. We work with you, and we appreciate you all so much, and your teams who do all of the daily grind. So thank you for that, and special thanks to CFO Glenn Cohen and his partner in crime, Jennifer, who honestly did a wonderful job preparing me for tonight's meeting, and I appreciate the mayor's kind comments of appreciation. Thank you so much of all for attending tonight. Those of you who are watching online, thank you for watching us and being part of this meeting. With that, I will now declare this meeting adjourned. Thank you.